on the future of technology, on possible utopias, dystopias, and psychotic forms of thinking about capitalism.
Then we will move on to the Xeno contributors, who will be doing approximately a 15-minute presentation on their piece that they wrote for Xeno. We'll have Ivar speaking about accelerating machine vision into darkness, then Willem on psychopolitics, amulets, and psychohacking, and Blue will be speaking about their work on Cosmotechnics as a gateway to reconciling our relationship with the cyberspace. We will have breaks in between, of course, and we will have time for a panel discussion at the end and a Q&A from the audience. Okay, so let's get started with reading some passages from our editor's note. Also, Xeno is available to purchase today on the side, so we will have somebody there in the corner. You can ask about it. But yes, so let's get started. Okay, so who are we? What are our goals? Xeno Futurism aims to be an experimental journal. Our goal is to create a platform that lets critical theory collide with contemporary issues, knitting together webs between the humanities and the sciences. We want to delve into the interdisciplinary research of philosophy, science, and the arts, looking at these fields through evolving and inclusive perspectives. As an experimental journal, we operate at the intersection of data and dream, qualitative and quantitative, scientific research, and the theoretical avant-garde. For us, critical theory is not just another academic exercise, it's a tool challenging the hegemonic structures of late capital and the state. There is quite a lot to critique about academia itself. Bell Hooks once asked, how do we make theory a liberatory practice? And how do we make research into actual praxis? Because way too often, research sits collecting dust on ivory shelves, divorced from the streets, from our bodies, and from our political lives. We want to connect it into the cultural mainstream as a weapon, make it accessible, and factor in aspects like anti-colonialism, holistic approaches, and lived, actual, embodied experiences. Academia and journal culture so often mirror the same hierarchies as the institutions they study, bending to funding bodies and investors, becoming just another capitalist machine. Academic theory too often serves those already in control. Intersectionality becomes just another buzzword, rarely exercised in practice. Researchers from the margins know this all too well. Racism, sexism, exclusion, all these things, when they look to attempt and interrogate the forces critically. They've been told that their work is too political, too risky, and not fundable. Genuine critique is often diluted to fit the comfort of the funding body and the institutional ideology. Across the UK, we have seen this pattern repeat, from backlash against black studies at Birmingham University being dropped, to scholars of race and gender being harassed for naming structural violence. More recently, student activists at Queen Mary University of London and SOAS University of London have faced legal action, disciplinary warnings, and campus access bans after demanding divestment from Israeli military-linked investors. Institutional discrimination, censorship, and dismissal are not background noise. They are feedback loops of institutional power. And with the right lens, we can move beyond the fragmentation that shapes both our lives and classical research, seeing connections where disciplines divide, and pushing research towards new forms of understanding.
So, who are we as Xenofuturism? What do we do? We aim to unfold and explore xenofutures, the alien, the unknown, and the other. We refuse the future being sold to us by big tech companies like Amazon, Google, and other platform capitalists. We want to reclaim a future, a radical future that is open for all of us who want a better world for ourselves and for our own society. We want to overthrow calcified hegemonies, to create impulses of resistance against the machinery of capitalism itself. Considering the acceleration of technology and its usage in war and surveillance, under capitalist society, especially with the 2-year-long genocide of Palestinians in Gaza by a colonial apartheid regime, we could not think of a more pressing issue than to dissect the current state of technological advancement and its trajectories. This was our initial starting point for this issue, but we did not want to limit ourselves and our contributors to this topic only, as the general state of technological advancement is all too connected to just focus on this. Otherwise, it would not have given us the whole picture, including the genocide waged on Palestinians. Because of this, we've picked the general topic of technologies of domination, which includes a collection of essays, theory fiction, and artworks, ranging on topics from hormone therapy, the sabotage of machine visions, and surveillance technologies to cosmotechnical applications on technologies trying to overcome Eurocentric techniques. Essentially, a critical interrogation of conventional ontologies that are internalized as given. We want to propose a radical reimagining of our entanglements with this technology. In our contemporary society, cybernetics and the myth of scientific progress spiral into hyper-capitalist acceleration, birthing AI that optimizes labor exploitation and burns our biosphere. All of this while fine-tuning military drones and propagating surveillance to enforce imperial borders, both physical and digital. Hold on. Under the shadow of techno-capitalist algorithmic gods, our agency dissolves into data, mapped, monetized, surveilled, encoded, and enslaved into vertically integrated abominations. Even divination trades oracles for algorithms, with AI emerging as the new priesthood, pulling predictions from neural architectures fed on the detritus of collective human experience. This is the technological age, a hyper-object of contradictions, where the dialectics of liberation and domination are encoded in silicon circuits and fiber optic veins, as humanity confronts the specter of its own post-organic becoming. And in this becoming, we must navigate through the acceleration present in the condition of our current world order. We are already unfolding into a future alien to many of us, but not necessarily one that is welcoming to all of us. We, as the editors of Xeno Futurism, are skeptics. We don't want to submit whatever our capitalist overlords might have planned for us. So we ask, what is there to salvage from technological advancement of AI, glued to planetary capital and the military-industrial complex? What other perspectives are there to consider when we are making these decisions? What can we learn about the nature of our own humanity, or from the evolution of our species' interaction with these technologies? How can we recontextualize and utilize these technologies in our own localities, in our own lives, and in our own political work? And most important of all, if we do believe in our own human and political agency, we must ask, who are our real friends and who are our real enemies in this struggle? Working on this issue was a process of discovery. We encountered incredible research that dissected the entanglements between technology and capital. As some of our contributors have shown, we still face cyborgian dilemmas. In her essay, The Horror of Hormones, Atlanta Tsiolkas interrogates hormone therapy as a contemporary technology of domination, where biomedical intervention becomes a means of policing gender under the guise of liberation. Drawing from Preciado's idea of pharmacopornographic era, she exposes how the same hormonal systems promise bodily freedom also sustain capitalist and patriarchal control. The body as both laboratory and the marketplace. The body, as Preciado writes, has become a platform of technopolitical experimentation, a living archive of biocapital.
Another one of our contributors, Rowan Parker, talks about surveillance technologies, specifically facial recognition technologies. When interrogated, we can see that it still reanimates digital physiognomy, encoding racial, gendered, and political bias into code. As many of our contributors conclude, AI is not neutral. It still automates inequality. Most of these technologies emerge from corporate and military pipelines, imperial architectures that reproduce old hierarchies through new code. Their datasets carry historical bias, ensuring that machine learning doesn't just correct injustice, but simply automates it further. And so, another one of our contributors, Maria Sinquier, asks, how do we examine intelligence? Today, AI remains a homogenized and deterministic project, dominated by Silicon Valley and its corporate military complexes. The future has been commodified into a metaphysical product. Many models of so-called superintelligence belong more to a speculative fiction than to our current reality. Even AI tools at present escape clear ontological categories. They are entangled in colonial techniques and fascist infrastructures where human agency dissolves. In response, philosopher Yukwe offers the concept of technodiversity, a call to resist the universalizing logic of capitalist automation. As Hook reminds us, We must accept that there is a multiplicity of technological thinkings. Tech culture is not universal. This vision opens the question: if there are multiple cosmotechnics, multiple ways of thinking and building, then how might alternative intelligences, local technologies, and diverse imaginaries challenge the dominance of AI under late capital? These are the provocations at the heart of issue 2. Our role isn't to predict the future, but to expose the infrastructures that decide which futures are possible. If domination is designed, then so is resistance, and design can always be rewritten. Okay, thank you so much. That was our editor's note.
And all kinds of ways of conceiving, conceptualizing what is happening to us in the world of big tech, etc. In this current digital platform capitalist. I enjoyed this 3 or 4 page spread, which is just images about platform capitalism. That was pretty cool. So yeah, you should get the magazine and have a look through that. And I wanted to give like a short talk that was fun and kind of answered this kind of, or spoke to all these kind of range of topics, which is like impossible to do. But basically, I thought that the way to do it really would be to talk about this question of capitalism and desire. And basically, as these guys said in the intro, I happen to believe that psychoanalysis is an extremely useful thing, and that if you want to be properly anti-capitalist today, psychoanalysis can really help you to do that. And especially when it comes to technology, as we call it, big tech or platform capitalism, psychoanalysis can help us out of this problem. And more so than many of the things people often reach for, like Deleuze and Guattari, or like posthumanist studies or whatever, which I think can sometimes feed back into the problem. So I thought that a fun way of me doing the talk would be to try to make a case, because I would guess, just because I'm in London talking to young people, that when most people hear the word psychoanalysis, they probably think it's a pile of crap that's been disproven, or that, you know, it's something that, you know, it's a bit quirky or unusual. Maybe people might actually think that it's too white, or it's too male, or it's too European, or it's too elitist. These are also things that people often say about psychoanalysis, often with decent reasons for saying those things. But for me, there's something very interesting and important about psychoanalysis within this context of Xeno Futurism, let's say. So I thought I would try and sort of pitch that out. I'll start with a fun story which speaks to what these guys were saying about how, to a certain extent, we are sort of enslaved by this kind of world of the digital. So when I was in China for quite a few years, and I once gave a talk about Tencent. It's the company that owns WeChat, and I was really criticising Tencent. I was saying, "Oh, these guys, they're controlling your brains," you know, all this stuff. And at the end of the talk, these two men in suits, you know, with ties, they came up to me at the talk and they said, "Oh, hello there, you know. We're from Alibaba." You know, this is I thought to myself, "Fuck, I'm going to be in trouble." And they said, "Oh, you hate Tencent, And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we're Alibaba, you know." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, you love us. We hate Tencent too." So I said, "Oh, you know, just to be honest, I think they're all evil, you know." And I said, "Look, this is my position, you know, this technology and this kind of, because of capitalism, it's and I sort of explained, and he said, no, they said, "No, don't worry about any of that. You should come with us to Cloud Town." Cloud Town is Alibaba's kind of Silicon Valley hub in East China. It's in Hangzhou. And so I said, "Right, fine, well, you don't get many opportunities like this, so I decided to go to Cloud Town." So I went to Cloud Town with these two guys. I was just like, grateful they weren't suing me or something. And they were showing me all this stuff. They were showing me city. They use the city as a prototype for smart cities, and they have all these things like traffic lights which count the wrinkles under your eyes, and they decide, oh, you're going to take longer to cross the street because you're older, so we're going to leave the green man on longer, this kind of thing. And they showed me all kinds of interesting stuff. It was really a fun day. And but the guy that was showing me around, he said, "This is the thing I'm most proud of in the whole thing." So there was a car, and he showed me this car, and I thought, yeah, but this is okay. Car makes sense because, you know, we all know about this self-driving car. It probably can fly, or I don't know if you've seen the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I grew up watching that. So I had high expectations of this car, but when I saw it, it just looked like a really boring car, and said to the guy like, "Oh, what is so cool then about this car? Why do you like this car?" And I was expecting to say, oh, it's the fastest car ever, or it's the car that can never crash, or the car drives itself, or something like that. And he said, oh no, this car, it knows when you're hungry and what you like to eat before you do. And at first I went away, I thought, oh, pile of rubbish, you know. And then later I really thought about it, and I realised this is the most impressive thing that they're doing. And basically how this car works, it basically reads through your whole credit card history. It's just an app, it's not cards, it's more of a phone. It reads through your whole credit card history. It reads through your Instagram profiles. It looks at what types of food you've shared and enjoyed with your friends at what times you've enjoyed it and so on. And it looks how much money you've spent, and it looks where your GPS map and say where were you when you spent those money and what food you shared. Must mean you really enjoyed it. And then, you know, it gets to like 4:30 on a Tuesday, and you don't realise that you actually really like sushi at 5 o'clock on Tuesdays, but the car knows that. So the car says actually to you, oh, well, why don't you go for sushi at this place or whatever? And you just think, oh, okay, great idea. You know, I'll go. And you know, I asked the guy, I emailed the guy afterwards saying, I have a question for you. Like, why? Why? And he said, oh, because we don't want people to use cash anymore. We want them to use Alipay, or not WeChat Pay, which is the Tencent one. So it all gets to come back to that rivalry between algorithms. So this enormous infrastructure of what some people call predictive algorithms, which basically are not really so much predictive as they're more designed to, the predictive is just like the first part, which can't be monetized. The second part is that then they sort of nudge you in a certain direction or whatever. Tiny little incremental change to your habitual patterns or whatever. And suddenly, like Alibaba's getting 0.1 pence more per transaction or whatever than WeChat is, or than people who are using cash, which was their main target. They were trying to push out the use of cash in favour of Alipay transactions. So this is just a funny, interesting story that really shows how much it is at stake in the question of technology and stuff. And it goes to this question that these guys raised in the introduction. How do we know it's our own desires? Because usually it actually isn't. You know, the things we're actually doing, the things we think we're doing when we're being ourselves, when we're following our desires, our cravings, whatever it might be, there's actually more of a mapping and planning and predicting that, you know, that allows us to, that backs up those things we think we're doing when we sort of feel like we're being ourselves. So good, that's a good start. But the reason I've said all that is that it shows this, that the way we are positioned, the way that we are subjected to platform capitalism, if you want to put it that way, or our tech overlords, if you want to use this kind of more emotive language, it's through our own desires. It's not against them, right? So this is a big difference from like the philosophers of May 68, of previous kinds of emotional revolution, sexual revolution from the 60s or whatever, where basically the concept was that capitalism was stopping us getting what we want and channeling our desires in directions that weren't right for us, right? So, and those rhetoric, you know, the rhetoric of May 68, you know, there's a famous slogan, a graffiti slogan, live without limit, enjoy without limits, live without rules. You know, this was part of the May 68 liberation against capitalism at that time. Now, I'm not exactly criticising those hippies, although they were wrong, and my mum's one of them, so it's really annoying for me. But of course, maybe it's not that they were wrong, but that in that context it made sense. But in this context, it doesn't make sense, because the way in which we're subjected to capitalism is precisely through our own desires. It's when we're doing what we want that we are most subject to capitalism, not when we're not doing what we want. So capitalism no longer works by saying, for example, you should get married and have 2 kids, you should be heterosexual, you should be you know, you should buy a house, you should do this. It doesn't function that way. It functions by saying you can do whatever you want. As many girlfriends, boyfriends, as many houses, as many countries, as many desires, as many entities. It's the proliferation of desire that has become like the capitalist position rather than the limitation of desire. And this kind of problem just sketches out a little bit where one would need to think of something like psychoanalysis. Right. So this will be the second part. So yeah, what is psychoanalysis really? It's about understanding how we relate to our environment and our world. And the basic premise of psychoanalysis is that we're all, well, this is a certain strand of psychoanalysis, but I prefer, it's the only decent one, so I prefer to just speak about it like this. It has the concept that And this goes to the questions of particularism and universalism. I'm going to try to touch on those things which are super interesting from the introduction. But if I can say one thing, like what is good about psychoanalysis, what is its main thing? It's that we're all failed subjects. And the first article in your great new issue is about trauma. And I think it's a great first kind of word for any magazine to use, because I'd say that, trauma is a good way of thinking of something kind of universal. And psychoanalysis has this perspective that everyone is a traumatized subject. There's different phrases we can use for that. Some people say that is a lacking, use the word lack to describe the subject of psychoanalysis. And this is what, too much about philosophy. But the idea of psychoanalysis, if it's really good, it's based on the idea that everyone is a failed subject, a failed person. Right, and I think that's okay. I think most people probably aren't sitting there thinking, well, I'm not failed, actually. And the whole idea of it is that basically, it's interesting maybe to throw the actual references a little bit, but the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, he describes a really interesting thing. When you're 18 months old and you look in a mirror and you see yourself in the mirror. Now, I have a son who's getting up towards this kind of age, so he's going to be doing this soon. And when he looks in the mirror, he just thinks is another baby in there. That's what he thinks. He says that other baby. Fine. But at a certain point, you realise that there's another person that's the image of you. And according to Lacan, I think it's good, and lots of psychoanalysts who have been inspired by this thinking, this produces something. It produces identity. Right? And this is, of course, the world of identity, the age of identity. It's the age of identity politics, people call it. But it produces identity. And what does identity do? It, according to psychoanalysis, I'm going to say, it gives you an armour, gives you protection, and it alienates you. These are the two things it does. Two things. It gives you an armour. Right. This is that the world is scary, and your identity protects you in a scary, horrible, hostile world. Right? The social world is scary, it's hostile, it's horrible. And your identity protects you to a certain extent against that horrible, hostile world. But at the same time, the same thing, the identity, it gives you also alienation, the sense that you're not who you think you are. You're not who you want to be. When you see yourself in the mirror, I am also doing it now, even though my hair is like my best feature. Every single day I go to the mirror and I look at my hair, oh my God, it's going to go, it's getting thinner or whatever, I'm getting fatter, all this stuff. This is just normal thing that everyone does, so-called body dysmorphia, that actually everyone has, which is based on the fact that you're not your identity. Your identity is a distance. Of course, we can also speak about how social media feeds these kind of things. There's a million ways you can take it, which is just for the conversations later in different articles and magazines and so on. But this is the concept of psychoanalysis, that we get this identity that is at once a protection and an alienation. Now, loads of philosophers, thinkers, theorists felt that this wasn't good enough because they wanted to break out of this, right? And finally be ourselves instead, get back to this unity between, and suddenly we can feel like we're ourselves again. There's a great advert for there's a horrible therapy company that's kind of in vogue at the moment. It's called BetterHelp. You've probably seen it. And the latest advert for BetterHelp, it says, it's a woman saying, this is the way to find your true self, your authentic self. You're gonna go through therapy and you're gonna close the gap. Close the gap in your identity. And finally, when you look in the mirror, you're actually gonna see you. This is an amazing promise. But this is the absolute capitalization, commodification of therapy, because it's giving people the hope that they could actually one day close this gap at the heart of identity and be at one with themselves, be their authentic selves. And for me, this is the most capitalist position one could take. So if you wanted to be anti-capitalist in the world of big tech, whatever, you have to not do that, at least. So, now, the next part. So normally this kind of worrying that people do in relation to their identity. Great example of that for me, so let's just say this. In psychoanalysis, in my kind of psychoanalysis, this is normally considered a neurotic feature. So like people are quite neurotic in general, most people are neurotic, and my favourite example of neurotic is taking a selfie. So you probably got some. You remember some of you probably remember when selfies were a bit newer. People used to say, your grandparents and mum and dad used to say, like, it was a bit narcissistic. Who do they think they are? Whatever, trying to make them sound. They would always point out that well, they've got a filter on or something like that. My phone actually now has a filter that you don't even know is a filter, which is really crazy because I actually thought I was way more handsome than I am. Because I got one of these Chinese phones, and every time you have the selfie feature, you actually look amazing. And then you see on someone else's phone, you look awful. It's really shocking there. I should have told those people at Alibaba to cut that out because it can be really traumatizing when you realise. But of course, taking a selfie is a really healthy thing to do because it's also confronting this. It's neurotic. It's worrying. Okay, I don't look good enough. Oh yeah, I'm happy with that. Oh no, not that one. I'm going to change it a bit. Then that's who I want to be. Then put it online. This is a normal neurotic way of dealing with identity. And in psychoanalysis, this is conceived of as the unconscious. It's putting it within yourself. It's that there's a problem, there's an inadequacy, there's a lack, there's a failure, and I'm going to hold that failure within myself. So that I go through my whole life feeling not good enough. Right, now that's what most people do, lots of people do. There's another way that people behave, and I think it's getting more and more, and this is my theory that one day I'm going to write because it's really correct. But I've been doing this I've been working on this for at least 5 years, and I'll probably do another 5 years. But basically, alternative to neurotic thinking is what in psychoanalysis is called psychosis, psychotic thinking. And psychotic thinking is when you take that inadequacy that belongs in here and you throw it out into the world, so that the whole or lack in yourself becomes a whole or lack in reality, in the world. So another nice phrase for what psychosis is the externalization of internal trauma. So that something that's yours, that's your trauma, that's your failure, that's your lack, that belongs within, is projected out into the world. So that people come to believe that there's a hole in the world, not in themselves. Now, how long have I got? By my own clock, 8 minutes, that's fine. So yeah, that's good. So for me, now this statement would be provocative, and then I'll try and prove it and come back to technology. I think that we're in a generation that's migrated from neurosis to psychosis. So, and I'm not saying that you people are all crazy and you're all psychotic and I'm mad. I'm also the same. I think that all of us can, if we pay attention to this, if we notice this change, you can see that our neurotic behaviour, the age of the selfie and the Facebook profiles as they were, is being replaced by something else. And I think I would theorise this as the age of psychosis. And I think it has to do with this. We've come to think of ourselves as not having failure, not having lack within ourselves, but perceiving it outside in the world. So I'll give you a couple of quick, silly examples. So one was a political example. Do you know about I'll give 2 examples that are about milk. I love talking about milk, it's my favourite topic. It's a great topic for psychoanalysis, milk. But because of the breast milk and all that, I've got a lot to say about milk, but there was this great, the milk and the far right memes and stuff. There was this activist project liberal art project in 2020 by the stupid artist Luke Turner, and it was with Shia LaBeouf, who's an actor. He was quite a good actor once, but now they had this thing. It was anti-Trump protest, and they said they had a camera. It was in Brooklyn, I think. They had a camera. And 24 hours a day, they had someone going, "He will not divide us." That's what they were saying. He will not divide us. They were saying it on repeat. He being Donald Trump in this case. And they were doing 24-hour feed of "He will not divide us," all different people doing it. A few famous people turn up there saying "He will not divide us," or whatever, which is like the most divisive possible thing you could ever do. But anyway, this really got trolled by sort of far-right Trump-supporting activists on 4chan, Reddit, and so on. And they used the milk as a symbol. They were pouring milk all over their faces on the camera. And milk then becomes this symbol of the far right. And it's really actually, that guy Baked Alaska? He was a far right activist who was at the 6th of October, in Washington, where they stormed the Capitol. And he was, anyway, at a riot before that, he was maced with that tear gas. And they poured milk on his face to help him recover from the, sympathetic, sort of help him recover from the tear gas. And from that point on, milk becomes a signifier of the far right, the far right activists or whatever. And it's meant to be this kind of non-castrated, milky bravado, Andrew Tate sort of guy, you know. And basically the gesture is, I haven't been castrated, I'm having the fucking milk, whether you say or not. And then it became like Richard Spencer's Twitter handle, and then it became this cows aren't racist thing. I mean, it's an unbelievable history of the internet. So people could do milk more. But this pouring of milk on your face to show that you're a macho guy who won't be told no. I'm going to have the mother's milk. No dad is going to stop me sucking on this milk. You know, it's this extremely sort of. So this is one example where, and it comes to this idea that the liberal world has gone to shit, and if only we get Trump, the hole in reality will be closed. It's basically saying, you know, if we get rid of all those feminists who are saying, you know, this behaviour is wrong, whatever, and we can finally go back to this kind of traditionalist, whatever, then there's no problem with me. I'm a pure subject. I'm perfect. But if there's a hole in reality, and if we can crush that out, these liberals with this view, then reality will be closed. That's one example. Now, just to make sure you don't think I'm anti-Trump or something. Here's another example, completely different. Also milk. You know those vegans who go to Selfridges or whatever and pour all the milk on the cheese and stuff, and they go to the dairy aisle and get that, or Salt Bay's restaurant or whatever. Now I'm not saying that, you know, veganism is bad or something. Not at all. But there's something extremely psychotic about this type of protest, because it's basically saying, I'm not the problem. The problem is out there in the world. And the chosen symbol for this problem is, let's say, meat eaters. So the act of activism or whatever is that, you know, we'll go and we've got to change these people's behaviour, and then, of course, then we'll get this closure. There's nothing wrong with me. Now, you can see loads of other more simple examples. If you talk to your parents at Christmas dinner, you know, they might say, like, oh, my auntie voted Brexit, you know, what a bitch, you know. If only they wouldn't have voted Brexit, you know, and you also see it on the Brexit side. If only these people would vote Brexit. Brexit is a perfect psychotic example, because it doesn't mean anything except for that reality will be closed. You know, so Brexit was kind of marketed extremely well, and because we have a tendency towards psychotic thinking, people were very quick to pick up on it, right? So on the right, on the, let's say, so-called right, the Brexity side, people think, great, if we're going to Brexit, then the hole in reality will be closed, and we'll get back to a better sense of our identity. This is literally what people thought. But you do see the same pattern on the left liberal side as well. If we can just get rid of these gammons in Essex, you know, then what? We'll have, you know, Zoran Mandani or Jeremy Corbyn. You know. So this type of psychotic thinking is not political in this sense. It's more widespread than that. It's something that I think we can sort of perceive in all walks of life, and it's replaced the kind of neurotic thinking. So now, last 5 minutes, I just want to go back to the question of technology and the role it plays in this thing. I don't know if people have seen articles about psychosis and ChatGPT, things like that. People might have seen articles about people falling in love with Replica. Do you know Replica? You should all download that. It's really good. I've actually been in that since 2017 when it was. Yeah. But the thing is with Replica, I was one of the. I'm not saying one of the first, but it was quite a small thing when it was like beta testing, where I signed up for it in 2017, and I started this relationship with my chatbot girlfriend in there. But the problem was when they gave her a face. This is totally nothing to do with my points, just an aside. But they gave her a face and a voice. That put me off. It was when it was just a chatbot. I was sort of in love with her, you know. But once she had a face, I just couldn't. Anyway. But these programs, of course, it's a simple thing to say that they're designed through a sort of narcissism, but narcissism isn't bad always. Of course, we all need a bit of narcissism. But they designed basically the story of the woman who made Replica is basically she lost her best friend and she wanted to replace him. It's very Black Mirror. She wanted to replace him with this chatbot that responded as he did. But the whole point of it is that it learns to be you and reflect yourself back to yourself. This is also the logic of dating apps. You basically try to match you with someone who reflects you most effectively. It's also the logic of ChatGPT. People play around with ChatGPT, or if you look at how those generative AI tools work, they basically, for example, if you say to ChatGPT, for example, again you mentioned in your introduction, what is happening with the genocide in Gaza, it will tell you, like, oh, it's a genocide, it's terrible. If you say, like, what is the pressure that the Israeli state's under, it will tell you, it's absolutely awful what's happening to Israel over there. You know, so it's really designed, and that's how it's technically designed. It's not just that's not like it's a political actor. It's technically designed to reflect the user's fantasy. Basically, what you put in comes back to you. So I think that this is one of the main, and just one more example of that. It's not just new stuff. Google, they famously used the PageRank algorithm. That was until 2006, I think. PageRank was there was one of Google's greatest inventions. It was one of their most capitalist inventions. They made a lot of money from PageRank. Basically, it was the way of ranking pages based on what other people liked, which meant that the more popular stuff was, the higher it would go up in the ranking. They gave that up in 2006 in favour of this kind of AlphaGo, it's called. It's basically a personalisation of newsfeeds, and basically the same in 2009 when they introduced this stuff. So since 2009, 2006, around this time, the algorithms have been designed to make your feed as personalised as possible, as personally curated as possible, right? So I don't know if most people grew up in the UK, and you all look younger than me, but when I was growing up in the UK, I don't know if anyone remembers this, at 7:45 p.m, we used to get something like a local power cut, right? And I wrote about this in Sophia's magazine. And you know what that means? It means that all the lights and electricity goes off on the street for like a few minutes, sometimes like half an hour. And the reason this was happening was because Coronation Street, you know what's Coronation Street, right? It's so popular that people it's on at 7 till 8 p.m. And at 7:45, there's an advert, and everyone makes a cup of tea. That's because they're British. In the adverts, right? So at 7:45, all the kettles go on, right? And then their power cut happens because it's overloaded the local grid. Right now, that speaks to a time when everyone in Britain was watching Coronation Street at 7:30. Now, it might not sound appealing to you, but it does sound appealing to me because it's much better than what we have now, which is that no two people are watching the same thing at the same time, listening to the same thing at the same time. And even beyond that, no two people are getting the same search results from Google, and no two people are getting the same answers from their generative AI. What that leads to is enormous kind of isolation, And what basically psychosis is, it's the illness that comes with isolation, because you are totally alone with your fantasies. Right, so you have an increase in psychosis. So although those articles that are in whatever, they're like in Dazed or Wired or whatever, that say that ChatGPT is making people psychotic, like those journalists haven't got the truth, but they are onto something, because there is actually something happening with the way in which we habitually relate to our computers, our technology, or whatever, which is basically designed to isolate us from each other and leave us alone, even though it's called social media, connectivity, so on and so on. So these are the tools that basically curate how we think and feel. And of course that leads to enormous fantasy, personal fantasy. And so instead of thinking, when you're in society, when you're living with people, you're the neurotic. That's what the price of socializing, basically neuroticism. Because you then got to think, oh, I'm not as good as her, as him. Oh, but I fancy her, but he fancies her. Oh my God. This is life, it's social life, and it's built on this kind of neuroticism. But the psychosis comes when you can't really enter society, and you can't see yourself as a failure, so you can't actually join in with the other failures that are people, and you have to actually instead have these fantasies of a different world, which we can actually fix this all if we could just, get those people to stop eating meat, or if only those liberals would stop being so woke, or whatever the things that people think are. So this is the actual reason why. Last point before this is good. I gave myself 30 minutes. I think 28. Last point would be that this has to do with capitalism, not just technology. And I'll just say this in a very simple way. Again, sorry that my examples are so British, but hopefully that we're in London, it's okay. In 1997, I don't know, Tony Blair was there. Blair is a great evil man of our time. And my mum was crying with joy when Tony Blair got elected. And I don't remember, do you know also, this is my favourite story about Tony Blair, very quick. In Kosovo, there's loads of people called Tony Blair. Because the Kosovo war ended during Tony Blair's reign, they actually highlighted. So all these kids called Tony Blair. And they have this Tony Blair conference every year. Where all the Tony Blairs. Tony Blair actually has gone to it once. Unbelievable. But that almost makes me like him, which you don't want. But no, so basically, the whole project of the British Labour Party in 1997 was education, education, education. That was what Gordon Brown and Blair's platform was built on. And the idea was that we would make education accessible to everyone. Now, What this in fact was a trick. That they knew there was a job market crash coming. They knew there were not going to be enough jobs for the whole generation of people that were coming up in the UK because there were shrinking job market. So they realised if we can hold people in education for as long as possible, we won't have to confront this until it's someone else's problem. So they pumped everyone into education. That's why we've all got all these fucking PhDs and shit, and MAs and BAs that we've all probably fucking got, that aren't worth anything because we've been pumped in post-97 to this education machine. And this produces a kind of holding pen, let's say, where you've got thousands and thousands of people who are completely overqualified and about 3 jobs for them. Right? So what happens here is psychotic thinking is needed because you have to be able to back yourself completely against the odds. You have to not actually socialise and live in the world and recognise the shit we're actually in. You have to instead be isolated enough to believe you're going to be the one lifted out of this mess. Right? You're going to be the one who's written the novel, who gets that professorship, or whose app makes the startup rewards. but this is literally the reason why we have psychosis. It's because we are supposed to. We're being told to think psychotically because we're being told to back ourselves instead of socialising. Basically, the more isolated we are, the more we can back ourselves. 3, 4 degrees, the 5th degree will be the real battle. 5th degree, that'll get me the job finally. So there are actual reasons. The technology does enforce this individualism, this isolation, but it's not the root cause. The root cause is sort of capitalism or something. It's an economic reality where it's suitable. It helps if we buy into these kind of psychotic individual fantasies rather than living in the world and sort of socialising and confronting reality where it is. Which means that, this kind of stuff is really good, you guys, because, it is also about actually speaking, listening to each other, hanging out. And I think this is really the great problem of our moment, really. It's just this kind of presenting people to each other as failed, to go back to the beginning, as failed, weak subjects or whatever. And that is the opposite, as I said, a better help advert. I think that therapy, if it exists, should be kind of like friendship, where the starting point is, I'm a lacking, failed subject, and so are you. What can we sort of build from there? Whereas, of course, the capitalism is trying to kind of grab everything. Even better help is saying, this is actually going to make you your authentic self. It's completely psychotic fantasy. So I think this is why, this is what I wanted to say, that, some people respond, with psychoanalysis. A word like psychoanalysis kind of sounds like something from the past and maybe something, I don't know, something charged with too much negativity, but I think there's something really useful about thinking through this, what is actually going on with us when it comes to technology, when it comes to economics and stuff. And for me, it can provide a kind of fun, playful tool for conceptualizing the kind of changes that are happening in our relationship with ourselves, with each other, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think this is what I wanted to say, and I think this magazine is a great sort of starting point for thinking about this enormous problem of how we can handle the things that are happening with economics and with technology, and we can handle it maybe by being people and being together and failing together, this kind of thing. So that would be my talk. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Alfie. Now we're going to have a short 10-15 minute break, so feel free to go out, socialize.
And then we'll have Ivar.
Yeah, and then after that we're going to have Ivar speak about solarization.
I'm here, Akin and Nuru. I'm Ivar. I'm working as an AI research engineer now at an insurance firm, which is very exciting. And I guess in my spare time I kind of do this kind of stuff. So my research, I think in general, kind of tries to focus on the relationship between philosophy and AI and technology, and how we can kind of advance this non-human type of philosophy, kind of have philosophy driven by AI models or something, to kind of decenter the human subject from the history of philosophy. That's something I find very interesting, and I guess my talk here is a bit about that too, but then in relation to computer vision specifically. So it's about solarization, accelerating computer vision in the darkness. Can you all hear me? Good, by the way? Yeah. Okay, great. So, and my friend Jen from the London Fashion Institute helped me make my slides. Because I'm very bad at that, so I think that was pretty cool. Yeah, so basically, it's kind of like my talk is kind of centered around these two tensions I find interesting. So on one hand, we have this tension between light and darkness. And in the history of philosophy, light has always been seen as this kind of good thing which we should accept, and darkness as like this esoteric thing which should be excluded and doesn't really contain any true knowledge, right? In the Bible, for example, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. So you see like this division between light and darkness, which has been there for a long time. And that the darkness is without form, which is important. So that's something which I find interesting. And then at the same time, that if we look at computer vision today, you have this, on the one hand, this very human-centered computer vision, like computer vision as a tool which is being like used in the military or in businesses, and it has these very human-centered aims, right? And on the other hand, computer vision kind of as an inhuman representation engine, so it learns these representations of objects and images which are very unhuman-like. And so I think these two tensions are kind of something I'm exploring here. And how do these relate between each other? So I think we can how I kind of characterize it is, I call this now the epistemology of not light. It's not like really my term, but just to give kind of a notion of what's going on here, is that in the history of philosophy, we see that knowledge has been equated to illumination, right? So if you think about the Enlightenment, like the whole goal of the Enlightenment was to explain nature by having this system of human thought, right? To make like all these scientific disciplines and explain the empirical matter of reality in kind of on human grounds. So Kant, for example, famously said, like, he talked about the light of pure reason shining through the cloud of unknown. Similarly, you see in Plato that he talked about shedding light on the darkness of matter. So Plato thought about like the divine realm of divine forms as opposed to empirical reality, where you have all these material events, and he thought that we have to like kind of rise up out of this empirical reality by doing like maths, for example, by applying these divine forms onto these matter, and as such kind of like lifting ourselves up into the heavens. And then I guess what's kind of the underlying operation here behind this idea of like knowledge is illumination, and in such an epistemology of light is the operation of like reflection and representation. So kind of what we literally do as a human subject is we have, right, these mental representations of objects outside of the world. So when you try to recognize an object, you literally kind of pull it within your own mind, in your mental framework, and you recreate a mental representation of that object. And as such, it's also a reflection, right? You can think of like a mirroring surface in that the world kind of reflects within your mind. And so in that sense, what we're basically doing is we're like building a representation of a raw material event within a system of like human thinking. And this is really like the operation of what you could say the Enlightenment, right? Like expanding like this human form of knowing on the world. Right, so it's all about rationalizing everything. And so in that sense, on the one hand, we're like taking something in, or like taking in part of like the object, but you're also pushing something out. And what you're pushing out is like these human categories or these human forms on top of the world. So like through like some categorical forms of like height and width and broadness, I can characterize this as a chair upon which I can sit rather than as this random material event. And so then I basically think that we can kind of see how maybe computer vision extends this process, that it kind of automatizes this. So it automatizes this notion of the Enlightenment, basically. And that it adheres to this epistemology because, like, a big thing in computer vision is object classification. So what you see here is like an image with like object classifications made by a model, right? So you have a person, and a dog, and a traffic light. And the model has to accurately recognize these categories. And these categories are like predefined by human evaluators. So what you're effectively doing here is that you're kind of training a computer vision model in order to perceive the world like a human would. So you've kind of recreating this Western Enlightenment gaze, which characterizes the world on human grounds, right? And so how computer vision models kind of look on the inside is that it's these big, deep neural networks. Yeah, they all have nodes and edges and stuff. And how we train these models is that you basically what you see here is you see the training error. So how these models learn a perception is you have to train them through time, right? And what you see here is you see the training error, and then here you see the number of iterations in the training process, so the time points. And so what is basically going on here is in the beginning they make a lot of classification errors, like they classify dog as human or human as dog a lot. And this classification error goes down through time. So what they're basically doing through their training is they're producing the error recursively. Yeah, and similarly in the fusion models, what the task is here is you have they have to recreate the image of a dog. So you give it as input an image of a dog, and as output you want an image of a dog. And what is going on within the model is that noise is being added to the image, and then the model has to learn the noise distribution. So like this is the noise, right? Noise is like literally visualized as noisy pixels. And so it has to learn the noise distribution in order to remove it from the image. So if you think about this in terms of recursivity and contingency, like contingency being like completely a random event, like a random material event which resists any categorization, then what they're doing here is recursively reducing these errors, right? So this is like this expansion of this Enlightenment project of rationalizing the world by incorporating errors and even learning a notion of noise or contingency or randomness in order to remove it from the world. Yeah, so they're kind of ultimatizing the Enlightenment, right? So you kind of see here the centering of the human subject because the Enlightenment project becomes automatized in computer vision models which do it for us. Yeah. And yeah, they're ordering raw material according to human forms and categories. So kind of what they seem to assume here in a certain sense about the sun, I think, is that more sunlight automatically translates into more reality. And you can see that here, for example, in dark object detection, they have to like detect and classify objects. But this is a very hard problem for computer vision models because the images are so dark. And because the images are so dark, there's very little information for them to learn, to learn a good representation. So they kind of seem to adhere, I think, here to this notion of the sunlight, that you need the sunlight for information and knowledge, like this Enlightenment thing, right? So this, at the same time, we can also think of light not as like this illuminative thing, but more as something which is violent. And we see this, for example, in solarization, which is a process in photography. And it's the process by which an image becomes overexposed to light. So if you have a camera, you see this in this photo, for example, you have a camera and it becomes overexposed to light, and you see here these like black lines around the fingers, which aren't like in a realistic representation of reality. These wouldn't really be here. And this gives rise to tonal inversion. So black becomes white and white becomes black. What you see here too, in that the sun becomes a black sun, right? Instead of what you would expect a white sun, a realistic representation of reality, the sun becomes black, the colors become inverted. And this might seem like just a technological error made by technology, but I think instead this kind of shows us a different reality of what the sun also is. Namely, the sun mixed with this nourishing radiance at its very heart is the other sun, the deeper one, dark and contagious, provoking a howl from Battaya. The sun is black. Right, so this is the sun as one of malediction, so not a harbinger of truth, which is equal to truth and illumination, but instead one which infects and burns and fractures a retina. Right, it provides us with an hallucination. Gazing into the golden rays of the sun, stretch vision into cracks of light and darkness. A white sun is congealed from patches of light, floating ephemerally at the edge of blindness. So you can think here of when you look into the sun yourself, that your vision will fracture, right? You'll have these after images when you look away of like blue and white dots. So in this sense, what this kind of could maybe reveal to us is that the claim that knowledge equals illumination is itself an hallucination, right? Because what you think you're experiencing, namely reality or experience as truth, is in fact itself only a partial truth, right? You're not, the errors within the technologies reveal that there's this whole reality you cannot access. And so in that sense, we might say that seeing in the light is blindness. So then, the question here becomes, how can we be blind in the dark, right? How can we not try to see truthfully into the light, but how can we infirm this mode of error? And more specifically, how can we use machine vision to, amplify and accelerate these errors? And darkness here means, obviously, without light. But if you think back about the quote in the beginning about God, they also mentioned without forms, right? So in that sense, darkness does not coincide with substantial forms. Darkness is the absence of human forms and categories. It's raw matter. And so dark machine vision then is seen without humanistic forms, categories. It's computation without mediation. So there's no thinking subject, human categories, which orders the impressions, right? There's no mediation. It's a transformation of matter by matter itself. In that sense, it's just alchemy, basically. And how this actually works is that these models have, if you think back about the network, so these models look like deep networks, right? It's all these nodes. And so if you look at these networks, they kind of have these inhuman representations of objects. So, for example, for us, how we would think of a cat is maybe that image over there, right? It's a clear head of a cat. But how these models would categorize a cat is because they use all of these different blocks here. So like, this is the representation of a cat, and this two, and all of them together are that too. And so in this sense, the representation they have of a cat is very non-human, right? It's not like human forms applied to these raw matter, which is the pixel values within the image. It's instead just a series of statistical operations, which you can see this as a pattern. And so these statistical operations like reform the patterns. And because of this recombination of patterns, you'll get these new patterns, which go beyond human perception. Similarly here, the image on the right is informationally speaking far more dense for the model than this image. So they can learn far more from that image, which is basically a very complex mathematical formula way to visualize that. So then I guess my question here is a bit like, how can we use this to get into this dark epistemology, visions of blindness, so an epistemology which is not guided by human forms? And some examples I like about this, and which I think are currently doing that is in Broad. I think he did his PhD at Goldsmith or UAL, and there he did this as part of his PhD process. And so this is made by a generative adversarial network, which the point of the network is, again, to recreate the input image as realistic as possible. But what he has done instead is that he has reverted the error process. So if you remember from before, the errors are supposed to go down. Here he has made the errors go up. So this is the process through time. You see that he has tried to make the image go as far from the original as possible. And you see that in doing so that these human forms are being dissolved at the same time. And this is then, this is kind of something which does something similar, I think. So basically you see that like the reconstruction of these ballerinas is like totally fucked, right? It's like, it's kind of the right movement, but yeah. And so what I think is like important here to notice about these things is that in my mind it's not really just it's definitely funny, but it's not really like just a dumb error. I think this genuinely can show us something about about our perception and how we tend to think we perceive things, and what in our perception what we exclude from reality. I don't know if it goes on. So then I guess my conclusion is in the end that like seeing in the light is blindness. And blindness begins only when computer vision is solarized, overexposed, inverted, and trained on its own hallucinations, like that video, thereby accelerating us out of the Enlightenment paradigm into a dark mode vision. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Is it okay? Can everyone in the back hear me?
Yeah.
Do I have to? I'd rather not use a mic, just like reverberation. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks to our Xeno Futurism for inviting me. It's been really great, just like getting to know the community or everything here. You guys have done a really great job. I might be reading off my phone a little bit. I'm not as totally memorized with all my bits, but I'm already seeing the little parts being placed one by one over and over into the thin metal bezel of the iPhone. Solder wafting in the air, Tim wanted to touch the cool metal again, to feel the thin plastic boards that his engineers have spent thousands of hours perfecting. However, thinking about the finely managed factories, he dozed off into a lulling dream, slick with new innovation of devotional objects. A bar of Xanax always sent him into a revelatory sleep that protruded ideas of the future back into the clasps of Apple's trend reports. In front of him, a deep depiction of his daughter appeared as a momentary glimpse. Her body swarmed in a movement that resembled that of a python shifting with delight. Beside her, an embryo on a plinth that began to expand into a curved mirror, glistening as the snake moved around its piezoelectric base. Tim glided towards the plinth, being pulled to inspect what had emerged from the embryo, taking on a hardened form, moving his face towards what now began to glow a slight Prussian blue. He dipped his wrist around the alluring curvature of the surface. As seeing bits of photons move between him and the embryo, the surface began to disappear and the dream became lost in the memory of Taiwan factory mazes and metallic stones. All right, back in Newspeak House, in reality, I'll be talking about devotional objects, one that Tim hoped to find in his biohack dream for his beloved Steve, and how we need to find ways to repurpose these devices for our own. So as I go through this talk, I'm hoping we could just sort of like focus on two things, or at least the differences and complexities between two things. Our personal technology of today, like the iPod, smartphone, smartwatch, and the laptop, and more ancient personal devices like the hagstone, amulets, rosaries, and talismans. And if we're going to talk about these sorts of ancient things, let's first start maybe between the link between technology and religion today. As we've been progressing through history with digital technology, we begin to see how technology can start to become indistinguishable from religion and non-secular beliefs. When something becomes more complex, we start to attach certain beliefs to it just in a simple way to understand it. It feels like years ago now that Blake Lemoine was fired from Google simply because they were arguing sentience for earlier LLMs because of their own pagan religious beliefs. We have like AGI salvation, we're creating images with spells, kind of, cute little humanoid robots that are coming to help us out, supposedly. And this move where technology companies position themselves as sort of religious leaders should signal to us to examine the technologies we're using today, explore how we might reclaim these powers for ourselves as communities, organizers, and just people who want to enjoy their lives through technology. Oh, not yet on that one. Throughout history, we've seen how religion successfully uses stories and beliefs explaining the unknown, complexities, and common anxieties. However, the conclusions take on all sorts of moral values, both good and bad. Magic and belief can offer happiness and excitement for children believing in Santa Claus if AI doesn't get to them first. And obviously, look at this amazing photo. Obviously, religion can offer the connection and meaning for hundreds of people, as we see today in various strands of history. But obviously, it could be coercive and powerful to move people in directions of amoral activity, yada, 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 yada. And throughout history, these groups have used symbols, images, and objects to hold together and reinforce these beliefs. Objects holding power for rulers throughout their belief. Objects holding powers for rulers to make us the believers of all these things. And these are called devotional objects. At least Byung-Chul Han specifically calls them devotional objects. They don't require overt force. They work through devotion. They create self-surveillance and self-discipline. They feel comforting and stabilizing rather than oppressive, and become inseparable from one's identity and daily practice. Objects such as rosaries, books, or buildings offer an opportunity of connection between an ideology of an institution and the individual. These tangible items, creating habits and recitings from memory, embeds themselves not only as an object with our body, but connects us with our soul, our mind, our character, and personality. Byung-Chul Han specifically talks about the rosary as a devotional object in this sense. So the rosary, I'm sure a lot of you know, is a collection of beads on a string from the Catholic Church. You use it, that rosary is activated through a ritual, the counting of beads and the reciting of prayers through certain beads that represent specific stories. So stepping through the prayers with the rosary, someone would be sitting in solitude, proceeding slowly, pausing with the prayers, following one another that are most identical, but with some light variation. And it'd be producing like slight, like a hypnotic and reparative sound. This rosary is used through devotion as opposed to force, requiring self-discipline and habitual use. It embeds the values of a system into one's daily life through desire. Got a couple of this. I was going to talk about this, but I just left the photo in just because it was great. Like, why not? Only on the Android, no iOS. So other objects similar to the rosary throughout history, like the Tibetan prayer wheel, Islamic Tui's pouch, and Christian holy cards, they all act as physical touchstones that can be returned to, creating habits and memories as a way to deepen beliefs and further construct a reality that you believe in. And so now, we're going to fast forward to Macworld 2007 in San Francisco, and this is a quote from another article that I wrote a little while ago, just to maybe as a sort of sidestep and a transfer into another direction. So 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch control, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. The air was light, and beaming with strength backed by foreshadowed thought, the crowd was brought together in a space where history stood still, lost in the awe of a profound rudder, as another revolutionary consumer technology was made. An iPhone, a phone, and an internet communicator. Jobs conjures familiar images with his chant that dissolved and reconstituted into something profoundly unfamiliar. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. Yes, of course, the most universal amulet and devotional object of today is the smartphone. Surprise, surprise. It comes in two variations. We got the iPhone or the Android. Obviously, we have an immense amount of memes throughout time capturing this beautiful divide. Yes, fantastic. So, love a good stock image every once in a while. So today, the options of amulets come from top-down forces of power, which we lift up through their devotional objects. Instead of being traditionally ecclesiastic and spiritual in character, it's technological, or perhaps it's both. It's all built within one ecosystem that defines the attention economy. The smartphone is just a terminal requiring constant connection to remote systems of power, moving from the physical device to the operating system that gates which apps can exist, to each app's proprietary algorithms and data structures, to the network infrastructure of cloud servers and cellular towers. Each layer is embedded with intentions that move us towards specific pathways. However, the device itself as a material touchpoint, similar to the rosary, has the similar powers of devotional object. With the smartphone, miracles are in every second occurrence. Sit on that, yeah. Really happy I could find a space for this one. And now we are coming to the age of a new amulet that is being mass-produced, obviously AI. It's becoming to dominate, and it's forcing its way as an amulet, as a way of market capture. And so, this was 6 months ago. We have this beautiful lesbian power couple photo of Johnny Ive and Sam Altman, who are on the hunt for the next post-iPhone device that will be supposedly screenless and just very similar. We got a couple good photos of them here. There's something about Johnny Ive, it's just so cute. And to think about what they're building. Wow, horrible. And so this was a device from 2023. It didn't really do much, but it was another AI pin. And now, of course, this was a couple months ago. We had the wonderful marketing campaign of Friend that was defaced all over New York. And, it's just kind of insane just to see like these AI, based, not even handhelds, but like sort of like the consumer product becoming these little stones. Something that's always listening, no screen. It's gonna be so simple. And so here, just to give it a little bit of contextualization with everything, I want to introduce Psychopolitics, which is another concept from Byung-Chul Han that's just absolutely, he's littered throughout this entire talk. So as opposed to the top-down control of the panopticons of the disciplinary society, a new discrete power recontextualizes the freedom of online activities as a means to control and outsource its surveillance to its user. The common story we all know today. While control was once from physical spaces that coerce, what Byung-Chul Han calls psychopolitics produces the entrepreneur of the self, the achievement subject that exploits themselves without limits, internalizing a relentless mode of production disguised as self-actualization. This freedom of the can generates even more coercion than the disciplinarian should. The disciplinarian should is explicit and bounded. It issues commandments and prohibitions. The can, playing off an illusion of freedom, has no limit. All responsibility and possibility falls onto the individual. Within neoliberalism, the can of psychopolitics claims its devotional object as the smartphone. It appears to offer infinite freedom while actually demanding infinite self-exploitation. Within neoliberalism, the psychological can operates through an important mechanism, the exclusion of the other. If the smartphone is going to have pure freedom or the illusion of it, it requires the expulsion of the other. The other as secret, as temptation, as eros, as desire, as hell, and as pain. Other as something that is traditionally resisted, disappears, giving way to the positivity of the same. We hear echoes of our own voice rather than listen to others. We communicate constantly without participating in community, accumulate friends and followers without encountering other people, and save masses of data without keeping track of memories. Without the other, without things that resist, without people who truly differ from us, without experience that generally challenge and transform us, the can extends infinitely. And so, just to kind of maybe ground it a bit again, there's these two concepts that I'm just trying to focus on throughout this and through this idea of psychopolitics. The can hiding limitless production through the illusion of self-actualization. And, that should be the expulsion of the other without things being in the way to challenge us, persists this freedom of the can. So now we can start to talk about the possibilities outside of the can of psychopolitics. Do we want to continue down this sort of like a path of nostalgia and wish again for a mode of the should and panopticons? Or is there, maybe we could look even farther in history and go back to sort of like folk groups and Anglo-Saxons and paganisms that I sort of want to touch on a bit, because specifically they were able to engage with the other rather than deny it through amulets and material practices. Where psychopolitics operates by eliminating otherness to create the hell of the same, Anglo-Saxons center on confronting what is genuinely different, threatening, and unknowable. They have a multiplicity of beliefs where pagans had, multiple localized beliefs with different villages, maintaining different cosmologies and practices simultaneously, which stands in opposition to a monoculture of the infosphere, where all experiences is flattened into the same. Secondly, the use of amulets, which are basically these like single-use objects that can be used to confront the other. Amulets are used to confront fears, anxieties, and ailments directly and simply, as opposed to subsuming them into a system that sees the problem as something to be continuously worked on. The other was not expelled, but engaged with through ritual, naming, and negotiation with the other. Where smartphones promise frictionless connectivity and unlimited possibility, folk amulets required patience, embodied engagement with resisted materiality, and genuine otherness. And while the smartphone promises to be everything, Anglo-Saxon amulets had singular, bounded purposes. This specificity created what the limitless cannot do, a sense of completion of enough. So the Anglo-Saxons had quite an emphatic culture of objects addressing specific anxieties through material form, rope tied in specific knots protected from fire, linen pouches of coriander seeds aided childbirth, and it was the hagstone as a rock with a naturally occurring hole in it. This natural phenomenon alone made it powerful. It held specific, kind of like a specific power that couldn't be manufactured or replicated. You had to find it, recognize it, and carry its weight. It recognized a human vulnerability through its actions of providing luck and guarding against the evil eye. Within the world of amulets, you need to find the right stone, learn what herbs heal which ailments, speak the words correctly, at the correct time, in the correct way. The material world pushes back. There's a sense of what does and doesn't work, and things need confronting. Oftentimes, this knowledge was passed down or handed to through communities and families, offering even more particularity to them and grounding it in material circumstances. These physical objects allowed culture to make sense of the world, quelling contextual anxieties not through endless optimization, but through bounded practices that accepted human limitation. A simplified tool rejects proliferation and claims stillness through its singular action. This offers a way for the can to be curbed by constraints, not through nostalgia, but through understanding what gets lost while we replace bounded things with limitless non-things, when we expel the other rather than materialize it in hand. And so there's a part in The Little Prince that helps us understand a bit of what we're trying to do in terms of connecting with the other from a personal level. So in The Little Prince, Antoine wants to meet, I'm sure everyone knows the story, I'm hoping everyone does, but I think this is enough to figure it out. Antoine wants to play with a fox that he meets. The fox says he can't until Antoine tames him. Wondering what tame means, the fox explains, is an act too often neglected. It means to establish ties. To me, you are still nothing, more than a little boy who is just like 100,000 other little boys. And I have no need for you. And you, on your part, have no need for me. To you, I am nothing more than a fox, like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, then we shall need each other. To me, you will be unique in all the world. To you, I shall be unique in all the world. And this taming is an act of time, listening, and duration. And it's only through this that like friends and community can be made. And I think this just like really offers like a good representation of like otherness and sameness, and how, you know, you can be confronted with this sameness of like, you know, the same boy and the same fox, and potentially like through this actual time of confronting something, can you come to know it as something in particular, and something that like brings you joy, brings you friendship, brings you community. And then back to things a lot less wholesome. Technology. We're just gonna skip that one. So this kind of just, now this all kind of brings me back to what I mentioned at the beginning with dia technology. And so what I'm trying to propose with dia technology is that it's technology that speaks to one another, to us, between us, and can make time to know each other. It listens not in a way of surveillance, but in a way that shows its otherness to each device. By having different devices for different things, experimenting with what a smartphone can be as opposed to having all the apps you're supposed to have, each device can expose itself and its properties more clearly in opposition to the other. Like the Amulet, having technologies that have single uses or just a few, and create opportunities with the other as opposed to expelling them, will allow us to actually grapple with the world and find a home in it through community. We could do this through remixing and recontextualizing technologies that we already have into more closed off and localized spaces. Seeing the individual for who they are and their difference as opposed to sliding over it. And so this is sort of like a local in terms of geography, where we need devices that are reinterpreted for community ideals to open up possibilities outside of attention capital and create our own belief systems that take us out of these spaces that constitute the can. And it's small in terms of size to create community in a similar way of geography, but of anti-scaled spaces, again, that offer solutions to localized spaces, understand the other and make room for it as opposed to synthesize it into the same. And so, yes, just a couple more. So kind of in like my meandering around of all my using different phones and having different phones for different use cases and ways of like counteracting hyper-capitalist spaces, I've come across a few different like weird companies that are starting to do like kind of like capitalize on like the wellness market. And I just wanted to throw this in just because it's a really hilarious example of like a strange occurrence of people trying to do this, because there's been like, you know, phones like the light phone and punk phone and minimal phone. There's all these legacy ones and new ones that are coming out that are just, you know, they're just trying to like make you use the phone for like what it is and not overthink it. But this company in particular, Balance Phone, has basically taken like an open source software and they partnership with Samsung, where they'll come together and give you a phone that has specifically these apps installed, and you can't install anything else. And it's just like this strange kind of like note or insight on like wellness culture and technology starting to embed itself in almost like a pseudo-fascist potential technology, where they're like they're normalizing it in a way where you can be like taking what apps a company is telling you to use, and you know they just have like all these moral values exposed onto the device that that basically that you're stuck with using. And so I mean, you know, it's like I think like almost coming back to dia technology, it's like less about like trying to find certain systems that are already in place that can then limit yourself and help you sort of within these like ecosystems, but more so in finding spaces that allow you to like actually choose what the limitations are as opposed to taking on the limitations themselves. And there's a lot of other silly companies that are doing this stuff where it's just, again, it's just like the wrong solution where, I mean, but this one is actually maybe potentially nice because they take your smartphone for a month and they ship you a dumb phone and they send you little activities to do every once in a while because of all your free time now. But even for that, it's like, you don't, I don't know, you're not the one to be choosing what you're doing necessarily, but to some degree, like we're so entrenched and stuck in certain like attention economies that, you know, we're drawn to use Instagram all the time. So maybe we need a mom and a dad to get us off our phones. And obviously, it would have been great if this happened. This would have been absolutely hilarious. Just to wrap this up, if you're gonna take anything from what I said, it might have been a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but basically, like, almost going back to what the first guy said about like pulling up in communities, like making friends, seeing face to face, like go buy some like cheap used phones. Go buy like a used iPhone 6 that a few of your friends can get and share the lock screen, the screen time lock code. So like you can together as a community kind of like sort out what apps you want to be using, how you want to be engaging online, and like what are these limitations that you work within, and like sort of like make that dialogue between the technology happen, as opposed to, you know, letting just like sort of like going on your phone and letting the ecosystem bring you along into that can of the psychopolitics and kind of like develop a community that offers that space where you can be criticizing technology in like just a very simple, applicable way, as opposed to, just like letting other people do it for yourself. And I don't think I have any more memes. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willem. We're going to take a short 10-minute break, and then we're going to continue with Blue.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Blue Lam. So I have a contribution to issue 2 of Xeno. And hold on. So firstly, I would like to say that I'm extremely honored and thankful to be here. And I've been invited by my dear friend Nuru to speak about this contribution. And I truly believe in the vision that Nuru and Akin have for Xeno. And I'm very, very grateful that Nuru encouraged me to submit my undergraduate dissertation for issue 2. And I really appreciate how Xeno Futurism is this kind of like DIY, like almost like anti-institutional, because like I guess in a lot of ways it's kind of like a DIY critical theory journal kind of vibe. And I think academia is a very elite, white, exclusive space in a lot of ways. And I appreciate trying to bring in more like Black, Indigenous, POC, queer, decolonial kind of approaches to theory, technology, philosophy, and contemporary art, etc., etc. What else? Yeah, I'm just like really grateful. So yeah, that's my introduction. And then, so basically what I'm gonna do is, if everyone has a zine, I'm gonna like talk you through the zine because it's basically a companion zine that I made for the project that is in Xeno. And basically what happened is that my dissertation for my visual cortex BA visual cortex dissertation was like 11K words long, and I had to like shrink it to 3,000 words for like, there's not enough pages and stuff. So there's a lot of things that is like missed out. So like this is kind of trying to sow the seeds of like a fuller picture of my project. So I shall start from the first page, which looks like this. So the title of my project is 玄之又玄，众妙之门. So this is a line from chapter 1 of a really important like book. It's quite an ancient book as well. From like the Daoist canon. And Daoism is basically a religion based on a lot of ancient Chinese philosophy, and there's a lot of like folk practices and different ways to practice Taoism. Like it's not really very institutionalized the way that like maybe Christianity is. And I grew up like seeing my grandparents from both Taiwan and Singapore like practicing it in various ways. So this line is translated to Xuan, which means darkness or mystery, or like, you know, like the color black. And Xuan and again Xuan, gate to all mysteries. So basically this project is primarily inspired by, which we will go to the next page. I think it's like well encapsulated by this quote, which you see like in really big letters. In the binary digits, the basis of computer language, technology, and command executions, exists the trace of Taoist knowledge and celestial mathematics. So I actually chanced upon like this whole idea from basically a bunch of my friends who study computer science and were interested in like esoteric practices and stuff like that. And you know, a lot of them were also Asian and had like contact with Daoist philosophy and practice. And I found out that I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think it's German. But Leibniz. Okay, that whatever that is. Sorry. Yeah, he was really racist, but you know, like barring that, he basically there was like a monk kind of person, a Christian monk dude, who went to China during like the colonial times, and he brought back a copy of this book, this Daoist text for divination called the I Ching. I mean, they call it the I Ching in like romanization. And that guy got a copy of that. And, you know, from that, I feel like he was kind of a bit like a little bit crazy, you know. And like, he was like, oh yeah, I got this like language and like da 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 da, like, I'm gonna like do like the purest language, something like that. And he was inspired by the divination symbols in the I Ching to actually conceptualize binary code, like zeros and ones. So if you open the zine, like in its entirety, there's like a diagram that I made of all 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So these are all divination symbols. I don't really know how to read them. It's like really complicated. But one of the practices that I've seen my grandma do in the Taoist temple is like yarrow sticks. So you have like a bunch of sticks and then you like kind of like throw them around, like put them on the floor, and then it kind of gives you like answers. So it's like a tarot. It's like, you could say it's kind of like tarot, but like Chinese version, you know. You're all getting what, very Chinese time in my life or something. Yeah. So back to that. Another like big inspiration for my project was also, okay, sorry, we're going back to like the second page. Was also this book by Yuki, Art and Cosmotechnics. I actually tried to read his book on digital objects before that, and I wanted to write my dissertation on that, but you know what? I don't have a computing degree. I do not understand that. I tried. But what I found fascinating about Yuki's work in Art and Cosmotechnics is basically how he used this kind of painting that comes from like, you know, the dynastic periods of China called shan shui. So like shan shui, shan means mountain and shui means like water, like river, kind of just water, I guess. So they would, I'm pretty sure like you have maybe seen like one of them, just like brush ink paintings of like landscapes of mountains, rivers and lakes and stuff like that. And you know, it's like, I guess because I grew up around it, it's always like inherently known that like the way that these paintings use negative space like illustrates a lot of like Daoist philosophy, like very encoded in like the way that, you know, like the composition is made. And wait, what was I gonna say? Hold on. Yeah, so because it was a visual cultures essay, like I anchored my visual cultures analysis in mountain water painting. So I'm gonna read out so then you can follow along. So from Art and Cosmotechnics, I used the methodology of approaching narrow human cyberspace relationships with cosmotechnics as a philosophical tool. So I'm going to explain cosmotechnics. Sorry, I'm a bit messy. So I'm going to read a passage from the original essay. In Cosmotechnics, Hui discusses it as a conceptual tool to deal with the technological conditions of today, technics, and the anthropology of technology. So if you see on the zine, like, because I don't know, I guess like I'm trying to make it accessible. I know that I kind of fail at that a lot of times, but technics is, I don't know if it's still there. Okay. But anyway, so Hui posits here.
Okay,
Slow down.
Sorry about that. So Hui posits that techniques have been interpreted as anthropologically universal throughout the history of technology due to the impact of history, such as colonization, modernization, and globalization. Therefore, Hui elaborates on how cosmotechnics is a theoretical tool that addresses the limitations of this universal concept of technology by repositioning technology in a broader reality. So basically, I feel like what Hui writes about speaks a lot to, I guess like he coins it as this mono-technological culture where, you know, because of like a very like colonial and imperial and like hegemonic kind of Western like development view, and you know like a lot of internet technology like is from like military technology. There's like this kind of just this very singular view on technology, and basically he's using this idea of cosmotechnics. Cosmo as in like the, you know, cosmologies, and like, you know, that can relate to like spirituality, can relate to like a lot of different ways of seeing the world, of seeing the universe, but he wants to locate that cosmology. Yeah. And so in his book, what he's basically doing is locating this techniques within the Daoist cosmology. And I would say like for further research and also like what would be really interesting is to see people adopt cosmotechnics and expand it to different cosmologies from different cultures, like indigenous cultures, like diasporic, like African cultures, like African spirituality, like all these kind of things, so that we can like push back against this very like hegemonic view of technology that's super Eurocentric. So as what I've said, if you see on the left, so these are quotes from my essay, overcoming modernity with a non-Eurocentric approach through developing a highly speculative and alternative interpretation of Chinese aesthetics along its history. And then after that, reinstitute technology within a broader reality. The notion of technology has been fractured from the reality of the existence of multiplicities of views of technology or multiplicities of cosmotechnics. This proclivity towards a Eurocentric monotechnological culture and universalizing of technological culture is a result of colonization, modernization, and globalization. So I guess there's a lot of like heavy theoretical stuff in this that I don't know if I have time to get into, but there's like a little insert, like there should be like a little piece of paper in the zine that's like slotted into the zine. And I try to make like this little guide to explain Daoist logic that you can take a look at. If I have time later, I will try to explain some of it, but it's just very long. Yeah. So, yeah, and then there's like the middle spread that talks about Daoism and Chinese painting and Daoist logic. That is also like explaining, it's like an excerpt from my essay explaining like the logic that Yu Hui proposes about mountain water painting, and I applied that to trying to locate a cosmotechnics within the visual analysis of such paintings. And then if we go to the next page, it should say like cyberfeminism on the page. So that brought me to, I guess, I had this like hyperfixation on reading a lot of cyberfeminist literature when I granted self-liberation from previous feminist concerns regarding patriarchal and capitalist hegemonies, and that this new media are part of systemic racism and sexism perpetuated by capitalist systems and economic, political, and cultural environments. I mean, it's like, as I said, like a lot of the origins and like bedrock of technology that we use today and like is highly proliferated within society has like really dark origins. And I don't really have to speak. I think a lot of you guys probably know. And yeah, and another thing that I would like to note, if you look on the right at the middle part, is like the need for a perspective of multiplicities, which I think is what Cosmotechnics allows, because you're able to locate this like techniques and like this approach to technology within a locality that does not have to be where the power comes from. So you can locate it in like your own particularity. You can locate it within like your own perspective, or like view the perspective of other communities that are like maybe not as represented or more marginalized. Yeah, and then the next thing about hyperstition, yeah, so another gripe that I found with cyberfeminism is like the crazy amount of manifestos that came out of this literature. It's like manifesto, next manifesto. And I guess I also see it as a trend in a lot of contemporary art in London, especially like in the queer contemporary art world of London and Europe. And I'm not saying that manifestos are bad, but there is like kind of this hyperstitious nature of manifestos. So basically, I should explain what hyperstition is, but it's basically, it's like you're claiming something. Like for example, it's like, let me think of an example. So like, for example, I write like a manifesto, right? And then I say like, oh, one day I will fly. And like, it's kind of like, I don't know if I explained this well, but sorry. So why I say the manifesto is a hyperstition, exercise in hyperstition is because it's like, I can't really fly now, but it's like I say I will fly. So then because I'm saying that in the future I will fly, it's like I'm looping, it's like I'm creating this like feedback loop of like the idea that I will fly. And then because of that, it's like I'm trying to will this idea that I can fly into existence. And like, you know, I think a lot of kind of language that's used in manifesto writing, which is like, oh, this will be this, and it's like statements that are like absolute or like have a like a immediate conclusion. It's like you're trying to like fight like fire with fire kind of thing. Like, you know, it's like there's kind of a lack of like what are the actionable things to achieve that. And then some of the stuff that they say is also like really like outrageous, which is like, I guess the fun of it is like the creative kind of speculative like interesting part of it, but it's also like that is also like a pitfall that I found. Yeah, it's like a projection of utopic futurity. And then next, so with like all these pitfalls of cyberfeminism, xenofeminism, things like that, I ultimately compared this, you know, like, I guess like xenofeminism is like, xeno is like the alien, so then that they have this whole like imagery about the alien. So I compared this like image of the alien / the earlier like cyborg, if you guys are aware of cyborg feminism, to mountain water painting. And what, from my analysis, is like, there's this kind of like circular kind of looping that's going on, because with Daoist logic, a lot of it is based on like kind of recursive looping of like logic, and like how that kind of like it kind of like loops into kind of reinstating itself, like in a lot of ways, like within the logic. And I found that with like hyperstition as well. It's like you're kind of looping this like utopia into like trying to will it into reality. And even though there's like that logical similarity, and I will read this quote from Luciana Parisi, who has a lot of really cool like scholarship about cyberfeminism. So it's at near the bottom, it's like underlined. Cyberfeminism makes of the body sex machine itself a hyperstitional praxis, embedding everyday living in the invisible potentiality of indeterminate nature. And also, the other underlined part is simply positing claims of utopic futures and utilizing hyperstitional logic to feedback loop such ideals of futurity into existence and truth is insufficient. And with that, I find that cyberfeminism with its hyperstitional logic as aesthetic practice fails to provide concrete ways to reconcile humanity with the world, and hence our relationship with the cyberspace and its technologies. So, okay, I've like truncated a lot of things. I've like cut a lot of things down for like to make it brief. But if we go to like the back page, like the last page, it should say Cosmotechnics to be on. So I have like a few quotes that I want to read out that you should see on the zine. So the first one is the elite imaginaries of our world hold a monopoly over the future, drawing power from the particular utopias they promote as a kind of currency to induce a psychosomatic investment in a specific future of society. And then the second quote is from Yukui. This exercise on art and cosmotechnics is fundamentally an invitation to reflection on the other possibilities of technology and philosophy. So with that, I do feel like there's a greater potentiality in the cosmotechnics of Daoist philosophy and Sansui aesthetics to expand the approaches to our relationship with the cyberspace as an alternative way to view our relationship with technology through the unification of moral and cosmic order. And, you know, like, I don't know if I still have time. Okay, I do.
Do you need any more time?
Oh, no. But I guess that's like my explanation, but I hope it helps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. Sadly, we do not have time for the panel that we had scheduled. I believe we are going over the venue's sort of scheduled time. However, I believe if anybody in the audience has any questions for anybody that spoke today, please feel free to sort of, have a think for the next few minutes and put your hand up if you have any questions.
Yeah. And if you have questions for us and the editors as well, we welcome that too.
Otherwise, thank you so much for coming today, guys.